Good morning, everybody. Okay, this is your last video for the week before spring break. This is going to be our social studies video for today. And then you guys get some time off from work, okay? We left off on page 114, so I'm going to move on to page 115. If you guys notice, there's a big map covering half the page. It says triangular trade. Now, this is how slaves were traded. This is how other goods were traded, such as tea and sugar. It was called a triangular trade because look at what all the directional arrows make a triangle. So goods were being shipped from England to Africa, then to North America, then back to England, and also the West Indies. If you could see right, here, I'll show you right here, right under North America, what they called back then the West Indies. I know it's backwards on here. Those were islands that they also made a lot of sugar cane and things like that. So that was kind of the big trading route of the day, we could say. All right, let's get into it. Mercantilism. Mercantilism was an economic idea popular in the 1600s and the 1700s. People who supported this idea thought that the countries benefited from trade when they exported more than they imported. So exporting means when we're sending items out to other countries. Importing means when we're getting items from other countries. Mainly today we get a lot of stuff from China. A lot of the clothes you wear, it says made in China. So people who supported the idea of mercantilism, it's basically they just thought that the country would benefit more from sending out more goods, or trading out more goods than receiving more goods, okay? In this way, a country earned more money from its products it sold to other countries than spent on products bought from other countries, okay? So if you're selling more things, you're getting more profit from, selling to other countries rather than if you're buying from other countries, you're probably paying a higher price, okay? Over time, colonial trade took on a pattern known as the triangular trade, which I just talked about a minute ago. Triangular means three-sided. Triangular trade had three parts. Ships sailed to Africa, the Americas, and Europe. Some carried enslaved Africans from the colonies, took fish, lumber, and tobacco to Europe. Tools, tea, and manufactured goods came from England. On both sides of the Atlantic, merchants and traders grew rich. Okay. Page 116, it talks about artisans and craftspeople. These are people that are very skilled in whatever trade it is they were doing. Like, for example, a locksmith could be considered an artisan. He was an expert at what he did. Okay, so let's read along. It says by mid-1700s, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and Charleston had grown into large cities and trading centers. People from the countryside bought goods to sell to these cities. Imports arrived from other countries. Merchants bought and sold these goods. As people grew rich from this trade, cities became the centers of wealth. In the countryside, people tended to do many different tasks. In towns and cities, however, workers could specialize in one type of work or a trade. These were artisans, or skilled workers, and craftspeople such as blacksmiths, carpenters, wig makers, basket makers, and tinsmiths. Working in a market economy, artisans could make their living by producing the goods people in their town wanted to buy. Some colonial cities grew large enough to support artisans who made luxury goods such as watchmakers and silversmiths. Okay, explain which skill each artisan is demonstrating. Do people still perform these skills today? Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is colonial society, meaning how people were ranked on a social class based on how much money they made, okay? So we're going to talk about classes today. Not classes as in school classes, but economic classes, how high up a person's status was in a class. So Europeans in colonial society belonged to certain classes or society groups based on their wealth or importance. The highest class was known as the gentry. It included wealthy landowners and merchants as well as church officials. Often government and community leaders came from this group. The largest number of colonists belonged to the middle class. This class included small farmers, shopkeepers, and village artisans. They had little left over after meeting their basic needs. Most middle-class men were able to vote. The lower class consisted of ordinary workers and servants. This group of people did not own property or businesses. Unlike today, in colonial times, lower class members were not allowed to vote. A worker on a fishing boat or a farm would belong to this class. So would indentured servants or apprentices. Indentured servants worked without pay for a period of time in return for food, clothes, and transportation. So they weren't actually paid with money. They were paid with getting food, clothing provided for them, and also transportation. Enslaved people were considered lower than these three classes of society. In colonial life, class was important. Even at worship services, people usually sat according to their class. It was possible, however, for a hardworking person to move up in class. Okay, so they started this pyramid out for you. All the way at the top of the pyramid is the gentry, large landowners, rich merchants, and church leaders. So you guys have to fill in the other two parts. We talked about them, the middle class, and then describe them, and then the lower class will go all the way at the bottom and then describe what the lower class was made up of. Okay? Okay. Last 2 pages. This talks about the daily life in colonies on page 118. Okay? Work, of course, was a big daily part of life. Chores at home took a lot of time and skilled effort. Women made clothing, candles, and other household items. They grew, preserved, and prepared food. Most women cared for children. This could be a big challenge in families with more than a dozen children. So people back in these days had a lot more children than typical of modern times. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons was they needed a big family to work on the farm. That's actually why we still have off in the summer. It started off as children needed to work in a farm, so they had off in those summer months. Okay, let's go to the second paragraph. It says most children also had work to do. Starting early, at an early age, the chores became more demanding as the children grew older. Many children were sent away at age 12 to begin training in a trade. When they did have time for fun, children played with simple toys. These included metal hoops from barrels, dolls made of corn husks, or tops made from scraps of wood and string. Children sometimes made work into a game. They might hold a contest to see who could carry the most wood or husk corn to the fastest. Very unsimilar to what you guys do. See who could get to somewhere the fastest. You guys still have races and stuff. They just made what they had to do from work or chores. They tried to make it as fun as possible. Some children did go to school. Most New England towns were required to have schools. There were schools in some other colonies too. Sometimes children were given lessons at home. Most children did not have a full education, however. By the time they were teenagers, they usually worked full time. Only a few young people went to college. So it's not like today where most people go through high school and a lot of people go to college. Some people went to high school and only a few people went to college back in those days, okay? And a lot of people did get homeschooled back in those days too, kind of like what's going on now. They stayed at home. Their parents helped teach them. They didn't have online resources like we do today, so it was very different back in those days, okay? On page 119, it talks about religion a little bit, okay? Religion was always an important to colonial life. In the 1730s, however, an event called the Great Awakening took religious interest to a new level. Preachers traveled from town to town, giving fiery talks that inspired listeners. Large crowds of worshipers would gather for these talks. The Great Awakening helped spread religious feelings. At the same time, it weakened the power of the church leaders who had previously directed life in some colonies, because it allowed for more churches to come about, okay? The movement stressed that people should develop their own connection to God. They did not have to rely upon a church leader to tell them how to live or worship. So it's telling people it's okay. You don't have to belong to a specific church. You could pray at home. You could worship God in your own way, okay? It gave people a lot more religious freedom. Okay. I think I wanted you guys to do number 7 on page 119, so I'll just read it real quick. It wants you to provide 2 details to support the main idea that life and work of a small farmer differed from that of an artisan living in a big city. Okay, and that's it for this week. Like I said, in your schedules, you don't have to do tomorrow because technically you guys are on spring break. So I hope you guys have a good week off, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye.